Is it violent? Is it a tad bit exploitative? Does it go a little too far? Yes. That doesn't make it any less entertaining or good. Today, I'm going to review the 1974 movie Death Wish. Hi, my name is Stacia, and I'm just a girl on the internet that likes to talk about movies. Death Wish is the story of Paul Kersey, whose wife and daughter were brutally beaten and raped. His wife was killed. His daughter is permanently institutionalized. And the people that did that weren't caught, so he goes on a one-man vigilante spree on the streets of New York City. Paul Kersey is played by Charles Bronson, who is your main character in this movie. Vincent Gardenia plays Frank Ochoa, who is the cop who is investigating this series of crimes. Hope Lange plays Joanna Kersey, who is Paul Kersey's wife, who is brutally raped and murdered in this film. And you will notice that Jeff Goldblum is in this film as one of the street punks who perpetrates this crime against the Kersey family. And this is his feature film debut. The funny thing about this movie is this movie was originally intended to be a Steve McQueen movie, but Steve McQueen turned Death Wish down. Also considered for this role was Clint Eastwood after the success of Dirty Harry. Clint Eastwood turned it down because he didn't want to be typecast. And from what I've read, how this part was originally written, Charles Bronson didn't want to do it either. He thought the part, the way it was originally written, was more suited for a Dustin Hoffman type than a Charles Bronson type. And Charles Bronson wanted to shoot this movie in California, even though it's shot on the streets of New York City. He wanted to do this so he was closer to his family. But that was nixed. Michael Winner, the director of this movie, really envisioned it on the streets of New York City. And if you know anything about 70s New York City, it's probably the right call. The producer was Dino De Laurentiis, and he agreed with this decision by Michael Winner. So Charles Bronson had to back down at his insistence that he wanted to shoot it in California. Charles Bronson also wanted his wife, Jill Ireland, to play the part of Joanna Kersey, but another thing him and the director, Michael Winner, disagreed on because Michael Winner thought Jill Ireland was unsuitable for the part. He had to ask Charles Bronson if he really wanted his wife, Jill, to play this part. And upon reflection, Charles Bronson decided he didn't want to see her humiliated and messed around with the actors who were playing the street punks that do this in the movie. They agreed that they wanted somebody like Hope Lange to play the part of Joanna Kersey, which was suggested by Charles Bronson after he relented to his wife playing the role. And Michael Winner was like, well, you know who's most like Hope Lange? Is Hope Lange. Why don't we offer the part to her and see if she takes it? And of course she did. This movie really was the uptick of Charles Bronson's career. I don't think any of us think of Charles Bronson now and don't think of his role in Death Wish. He'd been in Hollywood a long time. He was famous, but he wasn't super famous. And Death Wish, after this movie, he became super famous. And this character of Paul Kersey, people think of it as Charles Bronson's whole personality, and he didn't do films to really discourage it after this. His whole personality became Paul Kersey, at least in the movies after this. After the success of Death Wish, it was the 1980s when, with the advent of canon films, that you have the other Death Wish movies. And they kind of take a ridiculous turn after that. But by and large, the 80s Death Wish movies are still fun to watch. And Charles Bronson was asked in several interviews what he thinks about the violence in these movies. It is quite graphic violence in this movie, especially when it deals with these scenes on the attack of his daughter and wife. Very violent, very graphic. And Charles Bronson said, "I certainly don't advocate anyone taking the law into their own hands," because, of course, Paul Kersey becomes a vigilante in this movie. He went on to say, "I don't think the film advocates that either. If my films have a lesson, it's that violence doesn't pay. And my opinion is that violence only breeds more violence." So what type of hit was Death Wish when it came out in 1974? It was made for a budget of $3 million. It was made by Paramount Pictures. It made over $22 million at the box office, which was a huge hit at that time, especially on a $3 million budget. And Paramount was so pleased with the audience reaction of this, they actually raised the ticket prices in the middle of the movie's run. It was a phenomenon at that time. People were talking about it, even with its vigilante culture in it. The 70s was a violent time in America, especially on the streets of New York City. People talk about the crime in New York City nowadays. It's nothing compared to the 70s and 80s New York City. So people had a visceral response to this movie. Yet again, another New York story, shot on location mainly in Manhattan and some in Tucson, a little part of it where Kersey goes to Tucson. But even that, shot on location in Tucson. The Kersey apartment is on the Upper West Side near Riverside Drive. It is very much an Upper West Side story. There's even a little part of this movie that takes place in Chicago, filmed on location in Chicago. At the time that Death Wish came out, there were a lot of complaints that it was too violent, that it encouraged vigilante behavior. Its critical response because of this was kind of mixed. But all in all, it is a slick and exciting yet gritty action movie from the 70s. You have a guy who is, Paul Kersey is an architect. He was a conscientious objector until violence came for him and his family, and just fed up of what he was seeing on the streets at the time, and takes the law into his own hands, for better or for worse. And Death Wish wasn't winning any awards, but it was an audience favorite. It was a big hit, and it is definitive Charles Bronson. It is probably the best vigilante movie ever made, and it spawned a slew of vigilante type movies in its wake through the 70s and 80s. It does post interesting questions of how far can you take personal justice or taking back a city? How far are you allowed to go? When does the moral line blur? And what would you do to avenge your family? I mean, he goes beyond avenging his family. He just becomes like a street vigilante for all crime. But sometimes, as the viewer and as a witness to events in society, sometimes that's when you have people on your side, because it shows the obvious criminals doing it and the aftermath of him enacting revenge. But morally, do their crimes warrant the punishment that the vigilante enforces? So all in all, I think 1974's Death Wish movie is one to watch, to understand that time. It is a heightened sense of 1970s New York City, but still captures sort of what was going on. It poses interesting moral questions in a very stylized and kind of sadistic way. It is violent. It is gritty. It is based on a book that had more of a moral objection to Paul Kersey's actions, because the movie itself doesn't show a lot of what might be wrong with Kersey's actions. Even the cops in it are kind of on his side. So it is an interesting watch. It's the movie that made Charles Bronson the legend that he is. But I originally saw this when I was a kid, along with all of the other Death Wish movies that just got more and more ridiculous as time goes on. But again, my name is Stacia. I'm just a girl on the internet that likes to talk about movies. And if you like to talk about movies too, I invite you to subscribe to the channel. Help me get to 1,000 subscribers. I'm on track to get 1,000 subscribers by the end of July. So I would love for you to help me to do that. And another way besides subscribing to help me get to 1,000 subscribers is after you subscribe, share this with people that you know like movies too. It also helps when you comment and give me a thumbs up on the video. It helps YouTube push it out to more people because they know people like this content. Thank you for joining me. I will see you all next week. I love you all. Bye.